just to bring everybody up to date. Um, we're discussing the law of one of the 39 malachot on Shabbat that we're not allowed to do is to carry from a private domain to a public domain, or a public domain to a private domain, or within a public domain 4 amot. We're not allowed to carry 6 to 8 feet. These are Torah laws regarding Shabbat. And the Mishnah stated that if somebody hands something to somebody, someone private property goes ahead and hands someone something, an item to someone who's in public property, even though the person's hand is less than 4 tfachim, and 4 tfachim, it's less than uh, let's say 15 inches by 15 inches. We say it is a violation of Shabbat if somebody on the inside, let's say someone inside a house, is inside and he hands from the inside of the house to someone who's outside the house. Let's say a poor man is coming for a piece of bread. If you go ahead and you would hand them a piece of bread. 4b 4b2. That's what we're up to. So the Gemara has a question. How are you chayav? How are you in violation of the law of Shabbat, the Torah law of Shabbat, if you have to place an item down on an area that has a certain surface of size? That means you have to hand to something that's 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, let's say 15 inches by 15 inches. But if you place it down on something that's less than 15 inches by 15 inches, the Gemara is saying that's not called a proper placing down. The law of Shabbat is you have to do a hanacha, you have to place it down. And it could be if something is not, let's say, this tissue box is not 15 inches by 15 inches. So if I would go ahead and place something down on a tissue box, let's say the tissue box is not, let's say a guy has, in public property, they keep a tissue box, let's say, on the wall somewhere. And outside in the street, there's a wall. There's a tissue box going. They want to be very user friendly. They're serving you tissues, and you go ahead on Shabbat. He goes ahead and he places the item down on the tissue box on Shabbat. That's not called a proper placing down, and he would not be in violation because the tissue box is not 15 inches by 15 inches. Now, why isn't that called putting it down? Maybe it's not the norm for people to put things down on such a small area, as if it's not that's called a normal way of doing the act of placing down. That's one idea. Or when you put something down in such a small area, it's easy to fall. Therefore, it's not called really placing down. But not only is there a law you have to place it down on a place that's 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, the place that you uproot it from also has to be. Because we said in Shabbat, there's 2 points. There's something called dakira. You have to, in order to violate Shabbat, you have to uproot the item from its resting place, and then move it from private to public or public to private, and then place it down. But if the place where it was resting was not a proper resting, it's not called you uprooted it from a place because it was never really resting. So therefore, the Gemara's question is the Mishnah, our Mishnah. The Mishnah stated both 2 cases. In both cases, the placing down was not in the place of 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim because you placed it in the hand of someone, or the Mishnah also gave a case when you took it out of the hand of somebody. Let's say the balabayit, the man on the inside, took it out from the hand of the poor man on the outside, and then he moved it from outside inside, and he placed it down, and we say that's also in violation. But he took it out from the hand, but the hand is not 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. So that's the Gemara's issue. The Gemara is focusing on the hand. The hand does not have that area of 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. So why is it in violation of Shabbat, both by the uprooting and both by the placing down, if it's not technically does not fit the criteria of 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim? Ben, is it clear the Gemara's issue? Okay. Ben looks like he's been learned this Gemara once before. Okay. So that's the Gemara. So now we are on the top of the page of 4b2. So the Gemara says, Elam Rabbi Yosef, Haimani Rebbe. The author of our Mishnah that states that you do not, because the Gemara is looking, where do we find such an opinion? Who is the author of our Mishnah that you don't require 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim? The Gemara says it's Rebbe, the Tanya. We learned in the Breita. Zarak v'nocha gil v'ziz koshu. Let's say a person threw something and it rested, and you threw something, you were in public property, and you threw something from one area of public property to another area of public property. It went to distance of 4 amot. 4 amot is around 6 to 8 feet. And that's the amount of distance that a person, if he would carry on Shabbat in public property itself. Meaning, if you didn't go from private to public or public to private, you just were staying within public property. But you picked up something in public property and you walked 6 to 8 feet, and then you rested and you stopped, you placed it down. That's a violation also of Shabbat. Okay, right. So, but let's say a person, if I'm in public property, right? Let's say my yarmulke fell off my head, and my yarmulke. So technically, if it's in front of me, I can go ahead and pick. I'm not changing from domain from private to public to public to private. I'm in public property. My yarmulke fell down. I could stand still, pick up my yarmulke, put it on my head. I did not transfer it for amot. I did not transfer it for amot. But I went ahead, let's say I found a ball. I found a tennis ball in public property. Now I want to throw that. If I throw that tennis ball to somebody, if I throw it, I pick up the tennis ball. I'm not in violation of Shabbat if I pick up the tennis ball. But if I throw the tennis ball 4 amot, 6 to 8 feet, and then it stops in public property, or it ends up in private property, I'm a violation of the Shabbat. So here, he went ahead. Let's say he had a little frisbee, and he had the frisbee in public property, and he threw the frisbee, and there was something standing out. There was something protrusion from the wall sticking out of the wall, and it went right into the boom. It went right into got onto the, it landed on that protrusion. Zorak agavi ziz koshehu. I threw something, and let's say it landed on this piece of wood, one assignment that was sticking outside the wall. So it says Rebbe Mechayav. Rebbe says you're in a violation of Shabbat. The Chacham say you're patur. You're not in violation of the Shabbat to bring a korban chatat, a sin offering, because now what would seem to be the reason of the Chachamim, because it rested, let's say, on this thing that was less than 4 tfachim. It was not 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. But Rebbe says you're chayav. So we seem to have found a source for our law and our Mishnah, that you don't need to have 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. Because Rebbe says you chayav, even though that protrusion is not 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. Let's say Simon, there's a piece of wood protruding from a wall. How big is that? A few inches by a few inches, not 15 inches by 15 inches. And because it says you can have something that's 15 inches by 15 inches also protruding, but it says it's a ziz kosher. It's a very small protrusion, and yet yechayav. So we see you do not need to rest something on 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. So the Gemara says that's not a proof, because hatam kedabina lemeima. There, the reason why Rebbe says that yechayav. Welcome back, Adam. Good to see you. The reason why Rebbe says yechayav, you're obligated, is not because you don't need to rest on a place that's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. Not because he doesn't require a proper resting area, which we have asked. We should require it to rest on 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. We're now on 4b2, on the bottom column. Ella like Abaye. What did Abaye say? The argument of Rebbe and the Chachamim by the case when you threw it on the case that we're talking about, when it rested on this protrusion, it's talking about an ilan ha'omei b'shut harab yachid. If we're talking about a tree that's standing in private property, so you have the trunk of the tree in private property, then nofo noter the reshut harabim. and it's the branches. The branches, you have your house, Simon has in his house, he has a tree, his backyard, he has a tree, but the tree, as you know, those branches grow mighty tall, and the branches are protruding, are sticking out into public property. And somebody was standing in public property, he threw an item, it went 4 amot in Rishut Rabim. It went 4 amot in Rishut Rabim, and it rested on the branch, and it rested on the branch. And that's the ziz, that the bright dimension, this protrusion, is this branch that was protruding. So now what's the question? The branch does not have a area of 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. The branch is not 15 inches wide, let's say. We're not talking about a very wide branch. We're talking about a more, standard type of branch. So yes, it is 15, maybe it's long 15 inches, but it's not 15 inches by 15 inches. So now how do you look at the branch? So the Rebbe Sava, Shadei Nofo Bata Ikaro. Rebbe says that the branch, you could consider it like the trunk of the tree itself. And just like the tree itself, it has it's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. The trunk of the tree is, if it would have rested on the trunk of the tree, it would be a chayav, because the trunk of the tree is the actual tree itself is definitely 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. So too, we consider the branch just like the tree itself, and therefore we look at, when it rested on the branch, it's like it's resting on the trunk itself, and therefore it's like it's resting on a place that's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. We consider now, even though it is in public property, even though meaning it's resting in public property. Where did the item land? In public property. It did not land in private property, because it rested in public property. But we consider this branch as if it's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. As Rashi says, it's like resting in public property on an area that's 15 inches by 15 inches, because the trunk, being that the trunk is so big, we transfer that type of status to the item that it was resting on outside. Rabbanan Safri, Rabbanan hold, Lor Mina Shadei Nofo Botei Tikaro. We don't say that the branch has the status of the trunk. One's the branch, one's the trunk. The branch is not 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. So it does not meet the requirements of a resting area, because it's not 15 inches by 15 inches. Adam, is it clear what we're saying over here? Everybody, is it clear? If it's not clear, Ben?
Fruit from the tree and in your land or on the outside. Are you allowed to pick it up?
Again, whose fruit was it?
My plant, my tree.
Right, but if it fell outside, first of all, a fruit that falls out on Shabbat, you can't. It's mukseh, a fruit that comes off a tree. First, on Shabbat, you're not allowed to pick a fruit off a tree on Shabbat. Number one, it's called harvesting. Number two is, when Shabbat came, if the fruit was attached to the tree, so therefore the fruit is not fit for me because it's attached to the tree when Shabbat enters. Even if the fruit falls off the tree on Shabbat, I will not be able to handle the fruit that fell off the tree. And certainly, Simon, I can't go ahead and take that fruit from public property and bring it into my property. And I actually carry, because if it falls off on the ground into public property, then if I carry it into private property, I'm in violation of carrying from public to private.
Can't save it for later.
Say it again?
Can't save it for later. You can't say, you know what, even though I can't have it, I'm just going to move it here. So
Right, because it's muktzeh.
You put something over it?
Yeah, I would say you could put something over, but again, the question is, you can't carry. You can't carry from private to public to put over it. So maybe if you find something, if you have something in public property, then you get into the question: are we allowed to move something in public property? Carry something less than 4 amot, because we have to look more into that halacha. To violate the Shabbat, if I walk with my yarmulke in my hand, and I pick up my yarmulke, let's say I have my yarmulke on my head, and I take off my yarmulke and I walk 4 amot in public property, and then I stop. I'm in violation of Shabbat if I carried my yarmulke for 4 amot, right, in public property. But can I carry it less, 1 amot, 2 amot? So I think we say if you should, you're also not supposed to do that, but you might come to carry 4 amot. Because if you carry any amount, you try not. You shouldn't. It's a fence. You shouldn't carry. You don't carry less than 4 amot, unless you can carry 4 amot. That would be a rabbinic thing, less than 4 amot. But 4 amot. Okay, it looks like Mark Andrews is going to join us.
I have a question.
Yes. Yes.
In private property, if a fruit falls off a tree in private property, you can't pick it up on Shabbat?
No, you can't pick up the fruit if the tree. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Welcome back. Good to see you.
Thank you.
If the fruit fell off the tree before Shabbat, then on private property, then you could pick it up on Shabbat in your private property. But if the fruit fell off your tree on Shabbat in your private property, even though there's no issue of carrying, but that fruit is mukser. Because when Shabbat came, that fruit was not fit for you because it was still attached to the tree. And being that it's attached to the tree, since you cannot pull it off the tree on Shabbat, that's considered mukser. Maybe you call it mukser machmat isur because the only way, because of it would be out of a prohibition of pulling it off the tree, so you will not be able to, Ralph, take that fruit on Shabbat. Okay, so just to bring Mark up to date, Mark, they say in America, this bud's for you. This piece of learning is for you. I'm about to say. I don't know if you heard that, Mark, but
Yeah.
We got some smiles from the audience over here. The Gemara, the Mishnah is talking about. So whenever you ever hear that commercial, so you'll think of the Gemara. The Gemara is talking about. We said in the Mishnah that if you place an item, if the balabayit, the man on the inside, places an item in the hand of the poor man on the outside, or vice versa, the poor man on the outside puts the hand on the inside, the fact that the person accepted it with his hand, and the person placed it in the hand of somebody, that's considered the violation because it was an akira, it was an uprooting of an item from public and placed in private, or vice versa. The Gemara has a technical issue. The technical issue is, don't we need to place it down on an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim? In order for it to be considered placed down, it needs to be in a place that's 4 tefachim, 15 inches, let's say around 15 inches by 15 inches, some sort of surface, a width, a length. But the hand of a person is not 15 inches by 15 inches. That's the Gemara's question. So it's missing. Good morning, Nathan. So it's missing in the placing down, and also you have to uproot it. You have to take it out from a place that's also 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim. And the Mishnah states cases that you uproot it from the guy's hand, and you're also chayav, you're also obligated. So that's what the Gemara is trying to find. Who is the author of the Mishnah that says that you do not need to place it down in a place that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim? You do not need to uproot it from a place that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim. That's what the Gemara is in search of that. So that's where now Ella, and we have Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says the Tana of the Mishnah. Who is the author of the Mishnah? Rebbe Huda Nasi. And we're trying to find which Rebbe, he didn't specify which Rebbe was it. Which case did we find Rebbe go on record that you don't need 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim? So here comes the Gemara's case. The Tanya. Rebbe, this is the case. We learned in the Breita. Zarak me'rishut harabim l'rishut harabim. U'rishut hayachid be'emsa. If a person went ahead and he threw an item from public to public, but what was in between the two places? There was a private domain in between. So Rebbe says mechayav. Rebbe says, good morning, Asaf. Rebbe says the man who threw the item, even though, till now we spoke about private to public, public to private, or 4 amot to public, cases of over violation. And here we have another case, went from public to public through private. So, but it didn't. How is he chayav? The Rebbe says you have to explain in a minute. Rebbe says you chayav. Rebbe says the Chachamim putin. The Chachamim says you patur because it never rested in public property, in private property. It went from public to public through private. And not only does Rebbe say Yechayav, now here we're talking about, let's say he did it unintentionally. He didn't know.
He said you patur or you chayav?
So Chacham say patur and Rebbe says Chayav.
Okay.
And remember, there's two, when we say patur Chayav, there's different cases that we could be talking about. Did the guy do it intentionally, unintentionally? So if he did it intentionally, he's Chayav, he could be obligated death penalty if he was warned and he was in front of witnesses, or chayav could mean if he did it unintentionally, he's chayav a karban chatat, the sin offering. Now, in Gemara's case here, he did it unintentionally. He didn't know, let's say he's not allowed to throw something on Shabbat from private to public, carrying on Shabbat. Didn't know there's any issue of carrying, of throwing things from Shabbat. He didn't know there's any problem. And so here where the question is about a korban chatat, the sin offering. So and comes up Amar Yehuda Shmuel, and who says his name is Shmuel? Mechayiv haya Rebbe shtayim. He actually obligated him 2 korban chatot, 2 sin offerings. Achat mishum hoksa. One is because it went from private, because it went from public through private, and then he says for the public part he did one chatat, and when he went through private to public, it's another chatat. He says he looks at it as if, we had the ruling, we had the Gemara before, that there's an opinion that says that kluta kemishun chadami, that when it enters the airspace, when you throw something from private to public, when it enters into the airspace, it's as if we consider it as if it's resting in the air. There was such an opinion. And now we consider it as if it's resting in the air, and now it subsequently goes from the air to the other place. It's like it went, it's like it now went it rested, and it was up, as if it goes uprooted from that place, goes into the next place. So therefore, he holds you will be obligated to chato. So what do we see? Achat mishumotza, one for taking out the item from private to public, and achat mishum achnasa, and one from because he brought something from public to private. Alma. So what do we see? Lo boy akira v'lo hanacha al gabe mokom dalet. We see that he does not hold that you need to rest. Something has to rest in an area that's 4 tvachim, 1 imah. That it has to rest 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. You don't require that because he says the fact that it never rested on a place that's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. It went from the public into the private, and then it went from the private into the public, but it's all in the air. So being in the air, so if I go ahead, if someone throws something in public through private to public, it never actually rested on a place that's 4 tvachim, right? Let's say he threw it from public, went through private, and then it went through the private and went into the public. So Rebbe is holding there's this special halacha that he understands. The Chacham do not agree with him. That once it enters into that space, it went from the private to the public, or the public to the private, even though it didn't actually stop in that place, but it's as if, we consider it as if, when it goes into that airspace, as if it's resting in the air. And therefore, now you consider it's resting in the air, that's not a 4, the air doesn't have a surface of 4 tvachim, it's air. you don't need an actual resting place of 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. So both when it comes to the resting, and then it's uprooted. We consider it when it continues from the private to the public. It also it's being uprooted from a place that's not from the air. So we don't require a resting place both when it comes to the placing down and both when it comes to the uprooting. So therefore, that's why it fits our Mishnah, because the Mishnah talks about the hand of the person. And the Mishnah states 2 cases when you place it in the hand of a person, you are obligated, or you take it out of the hand of a person. The guy on the outside sticks his hand inside private property and takes it out of the balabay's hand and places it in public property. We say he's a chayav. The guy on the outside is obligated, even though he took it out of a hand, which is not 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. It's not the legal size of the general size of that we would think you need to have in order to be considered an uprooting or the placing down has to be 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. We explained earlier in some comment. There's 2 different reasons we saw in the commentaries. Why do you need to have? Why is the general consensus of the general rabbis? Maybe this is an individual rabbi that disagrees. Why does the general opinion say you have to place it onto something that's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim? Because if you place it into, like we said before, we gave an example. If you have something sticking outside a wall, you have a protrusion on a wall, and let's say this is sticking outside the wall, flush with the wall. That's not a normal place that people place things on. In Shabbat, when you do a thing in the normal way, the work is done. But if it's something that's not. But if it's not the norm that people go ahead and place things down on, so let's say a windowsill outside, it could be that's not a normal place because the area is not, it's such a small surface that people don't usually place things down on such a place. That could be one reason. The other reason, some say, is that it's not stable. I mean, the item is not so stable and it's such a small area. So it's also not considered it's really resting. There's different reasons going why that's not considered a proper resting. And here we find the Gemara's understanding that we're not going to make it. We're not going to, even though a hand would be both reasons would not apply. A hand is a usual place that people put something into, and it's a stable area. But the Gemara's understanding that the general rule. You have to have a certain area. And the Gemara at this point did not suggest yet that, a hand is different. It's unique and it's chashuv. And that we'll see later on in the Gemara that maybe a hand is an exception to the general rule of 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. But the Gemara is now not making this exception. And the Gemara is saying, how does this work? Why are you obligated? Who's the source of this opinion? So that's what the Gemara is saying now. The Gemara seems to say, we found an opinion. We found the opinion of Rebbe. So the Gemara said, Haritma Allah, we have a Breita. On this Breita, this is a Breita. This argument to Rebbe and Chachamim, by the guy who throws something from public through private to public, right? That was the case. Rav Shmuel that say the Amrit Havayu, that they say they have an explanation of Rebbe. You know why Rebbe says Yechayav when you threw from public through private to public? Because it's talking about a Rishud Rab Mekura. It's talking about, let's say, through a house. Somehow you threw it. Or not a house. Let's say a private area that has a ceiling. Let's say it's a high ceiling. And you threw from public through private, and it went into public. Because it has a ceiling, so the Aminan, Rebbe holds, Beita Kamandim Malidama. We say that this house, which is closed on because of this roof, we look at it as if we don't consider it as a empty space. We don't consider the fact that it went through this house. We look at it as if the item rested in the house. Rashi says that even though the item was moving the whole time, but the fact that this is in a closed area, we look at it as if it was, it's not, we look at it as if it's filled up, as if this area is a house that's filled with items, as if it's full to the top, and therefore the item that went into this area, we consider it how legally, even though actuality it didn't rest in this area, we're going to look at it as if it rested there. Aval she'ena mekura, but if it's a place that does not have this ceiling over it, if you go through a place that would not have this ceiling, we don't look at it like it's resting there. So therefore, the only reason why Rebbe gives it a status of as if it's considered resting in a place, even though it doesn't have actual, it's not actually 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. It went through the airspace that it went through was air, but because it went through this, it was an enclosed area. It had a ceiling over it. So he considers this area that has a ceiling over it as if it's full, as if it's full with items. And therefore he can consider it that when it enters in that space, it's resting in this space, but we consider the space as if it has the space has it's on item. Right, I would say without ceiling, he would not give this ruling of consider it like that it's resting on a 4 tvachim, that it's as if it's resting on an area of a surface of 4 tvachim or 4 tvachim. Because it has this ceiling, he considered it as if he looks at this space as if it's full. As if the space is full from the bottom to the top, and therefore, and it entered into that space. So it's like caught in the space. So it's it's resting on an actual area of 15 inches by 15 inches. But if it would not be avol she'ena mekura, but if does not have a ceiling, therefore he would not agree that we would consider it as if it's what? It's patur. It would be patur. It's not considered. You have to be resting in a space that's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim, 15 inches by 15 inches. This case that you showed me that it went through private property because that private property had a ceiling on it, and that had a ceiling on it. That's different. You can't compare it to something where it's no ceiling. So the Gemara says, "V'chi tema hachinami mimekura." Maybe you're going to say the case of our Mishnah is also right. The private property, when he goes ahead and he took it out, the poor man, let's say the balabayit, the man who owned the house, was standing in private property. So maybe the private property that he was standing in was had a ceiling over it, which most private property has. I mean, depends if you're outside your house. Your backyard has no ceiling, right? Your backyard is private property, has no ceiling. But you're inside your house, and you have a ceiling. So maybe here also the case of the Mishnah that we're talking about, maybe you could say that the Mishnah is talking about that it had a ceiling, and therefore that's why the Mishnah states that it's not that it would fit the technical points of taking from we'll consider it as if you took it from a place that's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim because it has a ceiling. But that can only be good for private property. But public property, if it has a ceiling, it's not considered public property. The technical law of public property, to be in violation of Shabbat, it has to be, if it has a ceiling over it, that's not the public property. In the desert, when Jews traveled in the desert, the public area was uncovered. There was no ceiling over. City Hall is not public property, right? The fact meaning that it's not, right, you could carry it now, right, you could carry inside, but I mean, right, the people have a right to go there, but, first of all, it has walls, right, right, now the question is, but if that property, if City Hall is owned by everybody, meaning, when you say it's public property, it's owned by the city of New York, right, so it's not really, they allow people to go there, but it's still, there is an owner of the property. So so that also makes it, because if you would have a public property, let's say you would create a public property that has a ceiling, right? Let's say we'll take the streets and consider them, right, right. But let's say you would have a public property, if you put a ceiling over a public property, but then there's different issues, the rabbinic issues, because people might come to carry in a place where there's no ceiling. So sometimes you'll have in certain areas, the city hall is enclosed. It's enclosed on four sides. That's called the Rishut HaYachid. That's called more private because it's enclosed. It has walls. But let's say but let's say if you have an open space that has a ceiling on it, so there might be rabbinic issues. Obviously, if it's similar to a real public property, the rabbis would create certain enactments that you can't go ahead and, just like we said, the ocean or certain things, the rabbi said you can't carry in certain places that are not exactly public but are not exactly private, single or semi things that look, people can make mistakes. And then outside the kosher kosher also the whole, there was the heichal, there was where the menorah was also enclosed. That is covered. That's private. That's private area. There's walls. That's a private area. Now, right, it's a different korbanot. The most of the korbanot were outside. We're not. But then inside we had the with the ketoret was inside. That was inside. So the Gemara said, what but the Gemara says if it would be a public area which has a space, which has a ceiling, you would not be chayiv. For Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda Amar Rav Abba Amar Rav Hama v'chefetz da'alam b'shut Rabbi Mekura. If someone actually walked 4 amot in public property, but it had a ceiling, they put a ceiling on. You know what? The city of New York wanted to protect everybody from rain and snow, so they put scaffolding, right? The scaffolding would be a ceiling. So if a guy went ahead and he carried under a scaffold, public property, under a scaffold 4 amot on Shabbat, even though he was not allowed to do it, but he's not going to be chayav a korban chatat, he's not going to be chayav a sin offering, potur. While fisheina doma ledigli midbar. No, very good. So potur, this potur aval asur. There's something called mutar. The word mutar means you're allowed to do it. Potur means you're exempt from the korban, but you're not allowed to do it. That's what the terminology that the Gemara says. In general, this Gemara says a few exceptions to the rule, but in general, in Shabbat, when you have the word potur, means potur, you're exempt but forbidden. Just like if you've caused that, sometimes if you cause indirect, what? Very good. Patur mi korban and not from that there. Very good. Have a great day, everybody. Welcome everybody back. Thank God people are back. Good to see everybody. Ralph, have a great day. You too. Jack, good morning to you. Morris, I don't know if I gave you the proper good morning.